Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are pleased to have all of you here with us. I am Anton Sayalan, the Chief Evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions, and I will be the voice of the webinar this afternoon. We welcome you to Season 2 of Reset and Go, aptly named Revive and Grow, which is a part of our unique Saturdays Alpha Learning with Luminary, segments that are set to unfold over the next 3 months. Preceded by our webinar marathon, Lead, Follow, or Get Out of the Way. We will deliver 38 segments of pure learning during these sessions. So gear up to get your learning on. In today's segment of Revive and Grow, we are discussing managing your boss, a conversational exchange of experience for you to grasp the best practices, alter perception, and make note implement. It is to our benefit in being savvy enough to manage our bosses. So let us dive right in. Driving the conversation this afternoon is Varun Chandramohan, our trainer with Luminary Learning Solutions. And joining us today as a panel of experts are our guests, Mario Alphael, Country Manager for Sanofi Lanka Limited.
Everybody.
Mansoor Ahmad, Head of Infrastructure and Transformation, Country Head Malaysia Functions. And the wonderful Jennifer Randeep, CEO of Focus Direct Management Consultants, all the way from Dubai. Over to them now for what promises to be an hour of scintillating exchange. Varun?
Thank you, Anton. A very good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the second season of the webinar series Reset and Go by Luminary Learning Solutions. And what a session we have in store for you today. We're going to be talking about managing your boss. And joining us today is our wonderful co-host, the one and only Anton, and our three amazing panelists who've had many bosses over the course of their respective careers, Jennifer, Mario, and Mansoor. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I want to begin by asking the panelists, in this day and age, who is your boss? Is it your immediate supervisor? Is it all the people you report to? Is it your boss's boss? What's your take on that? And maybe we can start with Mario, and we'll go around the panel.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I mean, it's definitely a privilege being on this panel. And I think today is the day I'm going to dedicate maybe this next 1 hour with all of you, just to all my previous bosses. And I must say, sitting right here, I've been very privileged and blessed to have an amazing set of bosses, right? Interesting question you asked me at the onset. Yeah, I mean, if you just step back a little bit, and if this question was asked maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, who's your boss was a very simple question. Yeah, it's just a very vertical organization. You had one person you're reporting to, and that person was about everything. So you have very clear instructions, very clear directions, and you know exactly what to do, right? Today, I guess so much has changed over the last few years, and today we talk about matrix organizations, you talk about different organizational structures, project teams, and I mean, in a sense, you know, I would say today it's a more challenging thing if you ask this question, who is your boss? Because you've got so many different stakeholders that you are actually responsible for. And what do you do? I mean, you know, which direction do you take? Which advice do you take? What are your how do you prioritize what is being said? And today, I guess an employee can be torn between so many different directions as to who they actually report to. So it's not very easy to ask that question today. Who exactly is your boss? Of course,
sure.
For an organization structure, you might have a person you're reporting to. So you might have administratively you report to somebody, functionally report to somebody else. Yeah. How do you balance expectations, right? So I think I would let maybe Mansoor or someone else or maybe Jennifer to expand on this, because It's not an easy question. So maybe the next
Sure.
60 minutes, we'll probably get into this, who exactly is your boss. Yeah.
Sure.
Absolutely. Jennifer, Mansur, you guys want to take a stab at defining
Mario, I would add, I think you made a really good point there that 15 years ago, the answer would have been very different. However, looking at the title of managing your boss, I think this is more about managing your stakeholders, because literally everybody who I deal with, I have to serve, whether I'm going up or whether I'm going to my peers, that is lateral, or whether I'm going down. And it's different environments as well. When I'm at home, my wife and my children are my boss. When I'm at work, I hold a different responsibility. So I think it really is an evolving thing. And I think I've also learned over the years with different bosses, different people I've been serving, how to deal with them. So in other words, understanding, for example, characters and personalities, and these go from home as well as they do go in the office. You know, understanding how to deal with a particular person. So, all very good.
And it's good that we're talking about this because essentially everything that you said, Mansoor and Mario, I just like to add a little bit more to that. It's like, it's more about how are you managing yourself? Because it's about dealing with different people and dealing with different situations, and everyone calls for a different way of operating, right? So it's more about what do you know about yourself personally, and how is it that you're going to be able to adjust and to be in the flow of whatever it is that's required of you, of your boss, and of the organization in totality. So it's like, how are we managing our bosses? In my opinion, I think everyone who is asking for any assistance truly becomes your boss. So the question is, how do you navigate that and create something that is going to be phenomenal?
Sure,
it's an ongoing. It's an ongoing process. It's a never ending. It's all about changing and navigating and creating.
So it's being adaptable, really.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
I completely agree.
Very, very, very valid point. Which brings me to an interesting question to ask you. When people say you need to learn how to manage your boss, what are they talking about? Are they talking about earning your boss's respect, earning the boss's trust, or is it simply putting up or managing your boss's expectations, emotions, or even the idiosyncrasies that your bosses might have? How would you define what managing your boss means?
So, Varun, I'm happy to say, I think what we have to understand is when we're managing anybody, the most important thing for me, I believe, is rapport. And if you have rapport with somebody, you can build a relationship and you can achieve anything. So whether that's up, down, or sideways, it's about rapport. It's also about understanding characters and personalities. And I'll give you an example here. I've had certain bosses whose expectation has been I am a run individual as opposed to a change individual. Now, runs is very operational. I do the same thing every day. They know what to expect and it's very straightforward. However, when you've got a change individual, it's more of a transformation. So what I have to do is really gauge what my boss. I've had bosses in the past who have said, we just want you to do exactly what you're told. And I've had bosses in the past who have said, I want you to challenge me. The question I would really ask is, if I was to put myself into my boss's shoes, what would they expect from me? And I know that the majority of the time, it's for me to challenge them, it's for me to stretch them in different directions, it's for me to stretch others in different directions to see how we can really transform organizations. But most importantly is to be adaptable with that.
Right. That's quite insightful. Mario, Jennifer.
Yeah, I mean, end of the day, let's face it, right? Managing your boss is like managing any other relationship. Okay? And that sort of interplays into every other relationship that we also have, because if your relationship with your boss is good or bad, it impacts your personal life. It also impacts your career, right? So it's important that you understand some of the intricacies which actually Mansoor just mentioned. How do you manage this relationship, right? Clearly understanding expectations is paramount. You need to understand what your boss expects. And for that, you need to have very open conversations. Many organizations have got a top-down effect in terms of organizational objectives. So it's okay, it's very clearly written down. Your boss's objective is broken down to his team. Your objectives are broken down to your team. So fine, there is a linear approach into terms of objectives. However, if that's not very clear, then you need to communicate and you need to understand what I have to do, and that's important. And like in any relationship, I think that open communication piece is extremely important. And again, when I started off my career as a medical representative, that was like 27 years ago, and carrying the bag, and I worked for an organization, everything was structured. It was a multinational company, and your boss is highly directive, and he would tell you exactly what you need to do, and there's sort of no deviating from that, right? So we were kind of lucky to get into that kind of environment where we were trained by bosses like that. Today, possibly with different organized structures, that changes.
It's interesting because I think many things have actually changed and have actually gone into a way of how we have to approach things. I think our approach, especially in this time, has to be totally different. We cannot be thinking that we're going to be operating on the same old system. Obviously, it's broken down and it's not going anywhere. I mean, I've tried it. I think all of you must have tried it at some level. But the same old is not working anymore. I remember experiences that I had with my boss. I think that would be something cool to actually share here. Now, the expectations that we have, and the boss has to be like this, and then you have to operate like this. So most of the time, at the beginning, around about like 20 years back, was assuming that my boss is going to give me all the instructions, and I'm going to follow suit, point by point, and be perfect as an employee. Well, that didn't happen. My boss at that particular time was a Sri Lankan lady, amazing woman. And I remember going for meetings, and standing there and being with the rest of the team and with all my files and waiting to be asked questions as to what did you deliver and what have you experienced. And she never used to ask me any questions. So I had to buck up courage after 2 or 3 meetings and said, "Excuse me, can I have a word with you, please?" She goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Can you please tell me, is there anything wrong with me that you don't ask me questions? I mean, what's going on? Do you have a problem? Maybe I need to change something here." But I had to ask her the question. See, we don't ask questions enough. We're operating on assumption most of the time. So when I asked her the question, the lady brilliantly told me, "Do you give me a chance to ask you any questions? I don't need to ask you questions because you're delivering." So then I had to actually look at it and go, "Oh, wow, she makes a point. I really didn't have anything to be asked." But it made me feel uncomfortable that I was not being asked the questions, you see. So I think people have to learn and to be open to asking questions, and asking questions of your boss is really cool because you are not assuming what he wants or what she wants. It's about what exactly is it that would you like for me to deliver to you so that you're doing your job properly and I can add and be a contribution to you and to the company. I mean, I've always asked those questions of my bosses anyway. Some have liked it and some have not, but that's another story.
Yeah, that's a very good point that you bring up. Here's a wacky question. Have any of you ever been afraid of your bosses at any point? I'm sure there might be some stories here.
I had a boss that used to put the fear of God in me for some reason. Wow. And that was when I was starting off. And it was almost like, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, then your job is on the line. It used to be a threat all the time, you're going to lose a job. And being young at that time, and probably 19 or 20 when I just started off, it was like, Jesus, if I'm going to mess up, I'm going to be out of a job. And it was always being threatened, like threatened. If you don't do this, then that. But I said, but I've done everything. So what is it that you want me to do more? Well, you should know what you're supposed to do. So you have some bosses like that too. But the question over here is not to be intimidated, but at that time I was very intimidated. But I learned from that. And each and every boss, good, bad, or ugly, has really contributed to who we are today, quite honestly.
Absolutely.
I think that's the real key point that you just made, Jen. I think we've all gone through good and bad bosses, but it's the learnings we take from it. And even though we feel we may be suffering at the time, you can almost guarantee the 6 months, 6 years, or 10 years on, you look back at that and you say, I'm a better person as a result of it.
Totally.
Sure.
And something, I just like to add. I just like to add something to that.
Go ahead.
It's always important that you actually communicate. I don't think there are good, bad bosses. Okay, so just the experience that you actually take. And in my younger days itself, I started, if I didn't like something, I actually used to be upfront about it. And it helped me, right? For example, when I started off, like Jennifer said, I had this boss that used to bring the fear of life into me. He used to give me really hard feedback. So we used to meet doctors, that was our job. So after each call I make at a doctor point, he just comes out and he just gives me feedback, hard feedback, And this is really upset me, and I cannot continue my work thereafter. So one day I just told this guy, I said, I understand what you're doing. You're coaching me, but it really upsets me, and I just can't concentrate on what I need to do for the rest of the day. So could we have this conversation at the end of the day? And I was just like 20 years old, and I'm telling this senior area manager. Sure. So he looked hard at me and said, okay. And then, so he started then taking notes whenever I used to make a call. And at the end of the day, we used to sit, right? And he used to give me this feedback, and it really helped me, right?
Sure.
And I think I've been a bit of a pain in the, I wasn't asked, but I've been a pain to my bosses by constantly telling them something. If I don't like it, I used to always go up front and tell them. And I'm okay with my guys coming and telling me that too. Because as much as you would say it, you also should be okay to take that feedback from your own team. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Brilliant point there. Brilliant point. I like that, because it is more about truly being vulnerable enough to be able to get feedback and also to give feedback. Because if we didn't have any point of view as to the rightness and the wrongness of any situation, and we looked at the situation for what it is, there'll be more constructive criticism as opposed to negating someone and making them wrong. Brilliant way of doing it. You actually coached your bosses there, Mario. That was awesome.
Mario, you brought up a great point as well. And Jennifer, you mentioned earlier as well, I think communication is the key here.
Totally.
So for example, on a weekly basis, I meet my bosses for half an hour every week, my direct bosses. I also meet every direct I have for half an hour every week. And really it's about that open communication channel. Now that works in a number of different ways. It helps me build rapport. It helps me understand who the person is underneath the working environment as well. And it also gives me the opportunity really to understand values. And this is an amazing thing when it comes to actually how you manage people. Excuse me. My values have always been the same. When somebody asks me who I am, this is a question I would ask everybody who's listening. Who are you if you were to take away the role of you being a subordinate or a boss or a father or a mother or a brother or sister? What are the values you hold? And you carry that through all the time. Because once you can display your values, and they may be, for example, I would always like to be transparent. I'd always like to be honest. Yeah, I'd like to make sure that regardless of whichever environment I'm in, as a father, as a boss or anything, I'm always going to be honest with people. I'm not going to, lie to them. I think that's a real critical thing to understand what your core values are or what your core purpose is, because that will help your relationship in terms from a rapport perspective. But I would urge everybody with your bosses, make sure you get that regular time with them. Make sure they understand who you are as an individual. and that will help you really manage your bosses off because they will understand you so much better. But the other point is also when you go into those difficult conversations or when you get reactions, it's really important to actually take a step back, let that sink in, not get upset or not react. Sometimes you don't know what the other person has gone through. So I have studied something called neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. I'm a practitioner in that. And one of the sayings in there that really stood out was, it said, the map is not the territory. And what that means is, if I was to, for a basic example, to look out the window, and I was to say, Mario, look out the window, and we're looking at the same thing. I may ask Mario, what did you see? And he'd say, I saw trees, I saw cars, I saw greenery, I saw people. Now I'm going to turn around and I'm going to say, well, I saw buildings and I saw the sky and I saw aeroplanes. But the reality is we were both looking at the same thing. Oh, they're completely different answers. It's just my, the fact that I can take a step back and empathetically look at what he's done and just be patient about it. So I think that's the key thing.
Sure. Can you be friends with your boss?
Personally, I've built up very solid relationships with all of my bosses, but I've also had the value of respect, regardless of whether senior or junior. I've had to make sure that they understand who I am to the core. And an example there is I don't drink alcohol, but a lot of my bosses would say, let's go for a drink.
Right.
Now, the standard would be, and the joke is, Mansoor was going to be drinking cranberry juice. As a matter of fact, they wouldn't even ask me. They just say, yeah, I'm going to have this and grab a cranberry juice for this man. But that was just my value. People understand me as that, and they know that I'm okay with going. But an alternative approach for me might, I say to them, instead of going to a bar, do you mind if we go to a restaurant? You can still have your drink, just a slightly different environment. And I found that my bosses have been fantastically receptive to that.
Sure. Mario, Jennifer,
Yeah.
Can you be friends with your boss?
I've been friends with my boss, but I've also, as Mansoor mentioned, there's always been that line of respect. People should not go overboard. Usually, many people go overboard and getting too chummy. But the way that I have looked at it is like I've always been able to somehow be amazing friends with the bosses and also have that line of respect for them. And I know where to draw the line. It's not going overboard. And to add to what Mansoor was saying, I remember I don't drink as well. So when I had to go out for one of my bosses said, if you're going to be on my team, you got to be a drinker. And I said, gee, how am I going to do that? So anyway, I went and the person said to me, all right, what would you like to drink? And I said, well, I'll do a Coke. And you can put a dash of anything that you want. And then, of course, they said, okay, if you don't want to have something, it's okay. We're still going to appoint you. I said, cool. As soon as we got that out of the way, everything was perfectly all right. We could go out for meetings. They would drink, and I'll be sipping my Coke with ice on the rocks. So it's about, it's again relationship. It's about rapport. Very rightfully said, Mansoor and Mario. It is about and sometimes pushing the bar a little further, not being of conclusive of this is the only way things have to operate.
Sure.
It's like different strokes for different folks. You've got to be able to look at people from different perceptions. As you mentioned, perception is everything. So what you see, I may not see, but will you teach me to see the way that you see is the way that you question to bring out what it is that you'd like people to relate to you with. That's the importance.
So Mario, are you friends with your boss?
Absolutely. I think, I've also had situations where you in fact have your peers and suddenly your peer becomes your boss. Yeah? And he's your buddy, and so I think it's a fine line that you need to understand. He may have been your buddy, but you need to respect him that today he's your boss. So you can't be his buddy now, and you need to have that relationship as a boss. You could always be his friend, but at meetings there's a different way that we would speak. You would need to give him that respect as a boss. And I think Mansoor mentioned that, Jennifer mentioned that, and if you're not okay with something, I think it's always to be upfront and say, I'm not okay with this, and I don't know, I've been lucky that all my bosses have understood this. Although I do drink, yeah, as you do mention, right? But that's not out of the way. But I think it's being upfront and saying what works for you, what doesn't work for you.
Sure. Yeah. So how do you draw the line between being professional and being friends? I mean, I'm sure sometimes it's a very fine line, especially if you're close to your boss. But how do you kind of draw that line, and how do you know where the line is, or what is the line, and then kind of take it from there? How do you determine that?
There've been times that I'd like to take that, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
There've been times when I've been with my boss in meetings, and it's always nice to allow the person who's leading the organization at that point to take charge and to add value. So you know where to stop and not say, okay, I know more than you, so I'm going to talk, and you're my pal, so I'll go first. So it's almost like allowing the person to lead what it is that is being discussed in the meeting. And also when we are in a peer group, where, as Mansoor said, if your boss, or Mario mentioned, that if your peer has become your boss, and in a situation of that sort, it's always allowing for the boss to take the lead.
Sure.
And for you to add value to what the boss is saying. I think that's how you can actually learn to draw the line and not step it. Because you don't want to be an authority over the boss at that particular time. You don't want to give that respect.
I think that was one of the most difficult periods I ever went through. And that was when a group of us as program managers, I was promoted to manage the guys who had been peers for years. And one of the early learnings I learned was that if you raise the people around you, you automatically get raised yourself. Yeah. Throughout, one of the core concepts I've had with my team has been I know I will give you autonomy, and you'll all know that. 49 out of 50 times, you're always going to do the right thing because the trust is there. And the one time something doesn't go as planned, guess what? I'll be there 100%. So a lot of the time, I will allow my guys to come in, and my bosses as well will allow me to go in, and we'll do the talking, because we have that level of rapport and respect that I will always give him the opportunity to speak, or he'll always give me the opportunity. But I think the word boss is quite prehistoric at the moment. I think it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
Totally.
Absolutely. Mario, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're building around the conversation around communication, around relationship, and that's, I think, fundamental in how we manage our bosses. Like we said, I think earlier, like any other relationship, this is also a relationship which you need to have good communication. You have a good relationship, and also treat somebody the same way that you would want to be treated yourself. I mean, that's the core of it. So if you are not liking something, and you surely wouldn't, you need to put yourself in the other person's shoes as well. And I think Mansoor made this point as well. Even if you're having a bad day, your boss has come, he's been at you at something, try and empathize as to what the cause may be. And something that one of my bosses told me in my early days, which really stuck and which has been part of my thing when I was growing up. Either you're part of the problem or part of the solution. And he used to, lighthearted way say, you can only go to God with problems, right? Sure. If you're coming to me, okay.
So that's a good one. I'm going to use that.
This is Mario, go to church. Yeah. But if you're coming to me, you come with a solution as well.
Right.
I may agree, I may build on it, I may completely shoot it down, right? Sure. And that's something stuck with me, and which I have practiced in my career throughout. And I also encourage my team to do that as well. Yeah. So it's sometimes little things that you kind of take forward.
Absolutely. That's That's well said to me. In fact, I'm totally stealing that. So for those of you who just joined us, we are in conversation with Jennifer, Mario, and Mansoor on managing your boss, and we've had some fantastic stories being shared. And thank you for the questions. Like, there's so many questions coming in, and I see that most of these questions are being answered in the kind of responses that our panelists have been responding. So before I move into my next question, there's an interesting question that came from the audience. So this individual wanted to know if is there. Well, let me see how I can rephrase this. So what I mean, the audience member is asking: is there a difference when you call your boss by your first name versus calling them sir or madam? And I think what the audience member is trying to ask is like if maybe have you experienced that where you have to call your boss by sir or madam and you know versus the first name which is becoming a norm these days?
I think what you bring up, Varun, is really very cultural. Yeah.
Right.
So in particular cultures, when you work in different environments, you do have to go down that route. An example would be a lot of the companies I've worked for have been international companies where we use the first name and it's very open. When I've dealt with government in Malaysia, it may be this person's just a policeman, but the expectation there is that I refer to them as sir. And that's what I've got to do. I think the important thing is for me not to get emotional about it, and me not to get upset about it, because that's what tends to happen. You know, I do this and you do that, and it's ridiculous. But I have had it where I have been rattled a few times. Somebody has said to me, "You refer to me as sir." But within the working environment, I think I've been fairly fortunate and lucky that we've always been on first name terms. We've always been extremely respectful about that, regardless of whether it's up or down. But if people want to learn more about this, a really good resource that I've used in the past is a study done by somebody called Preceded. Now, he was a Dutch psychologist, and what he did is he looked at 5 power differential ratios in relation to countries. I would look at how does somebody from the UK work with somebody who's a subordinate, and how would somebody in Pakistan, for example, or Korea or Japan work with a subordinate? And I've used that as a resource just to have a quick comparison and then understand the kind of traits that I should be taking. Where should I sit in a room? How should I provide my business card? And this is just local etiquette. So I think it's a good environment.
It's touchable, yeah.
Interesting. Any other take on that, Mario, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think I'll just build on what Mansoor just said. I think, again, I have been working for organizations where we've always used first names, yeah, and that's fine, whichever, up or down. However, within the same organization, if you switch geographies, it can be very different. So, for example, I work a lot with India, so my bosses are in India, and the culture there is very different. And then you just, like you said, you don't get emotional about it. You just go with the flow because that's the culture in that particular country. But in Sri Lanka, the companies that I have worked for, at least, we've always referred to by first name. And sometimes it's not just hierarchical. Sometimes you may refer to a person as simply because of the person's age, maybe, or the experience that you would see, and that's not being disrespectful or something like that. You would just refer to somebody as sir. Okay, and I've had that experience. I've had an experience where sometimes I have referred to my first, my boss's boss or the MD of the company as sir, but they would always say, just call me by my first name. But you don't. You're like a 19-year-old and you don't want to do that at that point of time. But I guess today, generations have changed. What we did 27 years ago is not going to work now today. It's all
sure.
Mario, do you think people treat you how you allow them to be treated as well? In other words, in Malaysia we have titles, datos and datins. These are people who have been appointed those titles. It's like a sir or a knighthood or something like that.
Right. Okay.
Now, what I found is when I've spoken to them, if I've gone in a very respectful manner but used their name, a lot of the time they turned around They've said, yeah, refer to me as my first name.
Okay.
Whereas locally, that would never happen. You'd always refer to that person. A local Malaysian would always refer to that local senior person as a dato or a dato.
Okay.
So I think people allow you to treat them how you move forward.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it's more about, if I can add to that, it's more about how do you perceive yourself. It's more, what's your relationship with you is what it is I talk about. Because if you really know who you are and what it is that you choose to have as part and parcel of how you show up, it's really remarkable. Because I work with energy and consciousness, and for me it is like, unless you really don't know who you are, the strangest part is the energy is very silent and you don't see it, but it works wonders. And when you are being that enjoyment and that happiness, or respectful or not respectful, it permeates and goes across everything that you be and do differently. And yes, if I have a lot of fun taking the mickey out of people and saying, "Hi, boss, how you doing today?" You know, and it's not necessary that you have to be serious and go, "Yes, sir." And some people like it, so it does not make you less or more. If you really address somebody as to how they feel comfortable. See, it's not about. It should not affect you. If it makes them happy, go for it. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, there's no issue there. As everyone says here, be with the flow. I mean, chill out. Don't get stressed out for no reason.
And I also guess, I mean, it's more than how you address somebody. It's also what you deliver. I think any boss is more concerned. Are you delivering as to expectations? Right? And if you are doing that, I don't think people have got issues with the way you address them as sir or whatever, or first name, right? And that's an important part. I think we need to understand what needs to be delivered. But even simple things like you mentioned so much about communication earlier. So I've had bosses who sometimes when you talk to them, they want the full data. They would want all the details, and they would get very, very granular on what they expect. Right. I've also had bosses at the same level, in the same position, who have moved, and then they just want it in 2 lines. So they'll give you 5 minutes, and you got to be able to explain your thing in 5 minutes. So you need to understand this and kind of switch roles. So you need to understand, okay, my previous boss wanted all this information, but I guess I'm talking to somebody different now.
Absolutely.
And how do I communicate this in 5 minutes? I'm sure all of you guys have had this similar experience, and and then you just need to quickly sort of transit and now start changing how you communicate.
Oh, for sure. So we've been getting a lot of questions about, how do you manage a boss who has favorites, and and if you're not one of them. In fact, my next question was going to be, how do you draw the line, or how do you prevent yourself being perceived as sucking up to your boss? Like, how do you kind of ensure that even though you had the good intentions, how do you not come across as trying to get favors or whatever from your boss? So I guess we've had so many questions coming in from the audience, also asking, how do you manage a boss who has favorites and you are not one of them? So I guess these are 2 different questions. So I'm posing that together so that maybe each of you can give us some insights, because we are running out of time. I believe we have about 20 minutes left. So who would like to take a stab at it?
Favorite. Let's talk about favorite. Okay, so again, it's more about asking your boss at the very onset. Now, if I have a new person come on the team and my boss has already got a favorite, I would actually be friends with the person who he terms as a favorite to figure out what exactly the person is doing for her or him to be a favorite. That's number 1. Number 2, I would actually ask my boss questions like, boss, if I was to actually contribute really good to you, what is the one thing that you would like for me to do for you that'll make you really feel awesome within the team, within the company? What is that one thing that I can do for you? I would ask basic questions. There's no let's go into this long, elongated, trying to figure out. And no matter how large the organization or how small the organization, it's about you asking pertinent questions by sussing out the environment, becoming aware. So this boss has favorites. Okay, so what's the one thing that makes this person a favorite? I would actually be friends with that person to figure out what is it that turns the boss on about the work that you do.
Sure.
I mean, get to find out. And there could be different things that the boss is actually wanting to get done. And maybe that person who's the favorite is not being able to do it. So what can you add as a value addition to your boss that other people are not doing? So you become a favorite in a different zone. That's the way I would look at it, basically.
All right.
I think
Mansoor,
favorites
Mario?
is really, it's a really interesting and a difficult topic as well, because I would tend to say that when I go into an environment, I don't want to compare myself to the people who are my peers, because the only challenge I really am having is with myself. I have to make sure that I am better than I was 3 months ago.
Sure.
And that I was better than I was 6 months ago. So I'm continuously growing. If a boss is going to like somebody or have a favorite, it may be because this is their drinking buddy. It may be because this is their golfing buddy. It may be because they're not. That's okay. I don't need to be compared to that. What I will do though is always carry the values, like I said.
Sure.
You know, one very wise boss said to me in the past, he said that if I always do the right thing and I always aim for my end target in the most honest way, regardless of what everybody else does around me, I will always win. You know, I may not win every battle, but I will win the war. You know, so I think don't get hit up about what everybody else, you know, what your boss thinks about everybody else. Keep your relationship authentic. Be yourself, but also be genuine and hardworking always. And then I don't think a boss can complain about that. So it's why are the others the favorite, really.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Mario, your
I think Manzoor and Jennifer has actually covered most of what was said. So I think the fundamentally is don't compare yourself with others. Okay, a boss may have a favorite. Okay, you try to figure out why that person is the favorite. If you don't want to get into that zone, you at least continue to be better and keep doing what's best for the organization, for yourself, and be focused, and you keep growing. Right? And like Mansoor said, one of my bosses said, you know, he's no longer, he said you can never keep a bubble down. It'll always come up. So you just keep growing. And even if you don't gain something in the short term, over the long run, you're going to gain. Yeah.
Sure. Do you have any advice for those who are stuck in this conundrum? Like any, let's say, I mean, they're doing the work, they're meeting the objectives, and sometimes you could have a boss. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, we're all human, and biases could set in, and next thing you know, you're subconsciously either promoting someone or kind of pushing someone in a certain direction, and you're looking at your numbers objectively and it doesn't make sense. Any advice for those who might be there as bosses, like what you would advise them, and as employees in that position, what advice you might be able to give them? Maybe if you can share an advice or two.
I would, if I may, at this particular point, is what is it that you would like to do? Who are you? I mean, what is the one thing or two things that really allow you to stand out? It's more about focusing on you first, your relationship with you. What are your values? How would you add value to yourself? That would be a contribution to everyone else. Because unless you do not know who you are, you're going to be running around trying to figure out what other people want. And you don't have any space left for you at all. You'll be constantly running around trying to figure out how to make other people happy. The first thing is about getting to know who you are, what makes you happy, what's your value addition, and then bring it out with how it is that you relate to everyone else. The relationship has to start with you first. That's my personal advice.
All right.
I 100% agree with Jen there, and that's something that people really have to take on. It's your personal relationship with yourself.
Sure.
The other thing I would say is that whichever environment, if you're after personal tips, there's one thing having a great boss, you know, but the second thing is driving yourself. And there's an amazing bit of work by a gentleman called Stephen Kotler, and he talks about the habit of ferocity, and he talks about five key pillars. Now, the first one would be about motivation. How do you keep yourself motivated? You know, and that's based around your purpose. The second one is about flow. Now, you know that feeling, for example, when you're playing a game or you are doing a sport and the time flies by, or you're doing work and the time flies by, that means you're in flow. So it's how do you establish flow? You then go into risk taking. And I think certain bosses will appreciate risk takers. You know, there's a chap who said, his name is Shan Lakian, he said, unless 50% of the time you fail, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. So have that inbuilt in yourself that you want to always take risks. And the final two are down to learning. Bosses want people who are continuously evolving and learning and growing. So you should focus on yourself. And finally, grit. You know,
right.
And Angela Duckworth, she's written all about grit. And it's not just about getting to the spotlight. It's about how do you perform your best when you feel at your worst, and that's grit.
Wow. Yeah.
So if you develop those 5 basic, pillars, and you can stack them, you're always working like that. You're always going to get to a position of achievement, and the right boss will always support that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Mario, any words of advice?
I think it all again revolves around hard work. And then you said if that doesn't work, it's also important again that you actually have a conversation with your boss. Okay, what is it that you expect from me? Yeah. So if the boss has a favorite, you don't focus on the favorite. You just focus on yourself, and you ask your boss, what is it that you would expect? How could I contribute to make you where you want to go, and you be a part of that journey, which will help you. I also know that many organizations today have got structures in place to prevent this, but still, it's human beings operating in these positions, and no matter what the structures are, you would still have bosses who have favorites. I mean, I don't know if this is the right thing, but in the company I work for, it encourages people to talk about it openly. It also encourages people to escalate. So to your N+1 or N+2. I don't know how many, and so we are a Paris-based company, and you would have that going up to even Paris. So it just goes up, and you could escalate anything. So that's the organizational structure and the culture that we would have. I guess many people wouldn't have that, but it's always important to have that conversation first. If you're not happy with what you're hearing, and if you still feel that your boss has favorites and that's detrimental to your own career, and maybe to somebody else's career as well, we've got a system where you could expect, where you can escalate. You know?
Absolutely.
I don't know what others would feel, because in that way you also get into conflict. Yeah. So that's a different topic altogether. If you actually get into conflict with your boss. And then how do you manage that? Right.
Yeah, Mario, I think it's really interesting what you say, because how do we deal then? A real issue then is, how do we deal with people when we don't believe our boss is doing the right thing, or the boss isn't treating us fairly? And this goes back to, again, doing what you think for yourself. If your boss is not going to create the right environment, then what are you going to do to change that? But don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Don't live miserable. Do something about it. And that's what the channel is spot on.
Yeah. And Mansur, you bring an interesting point, and even Mario touched on that. And that we just got a question, where this particular audience member has asked, what happens, or how do you handle a boss who is threatened by you, or feels that somebody who looks at your competency or is threatened that you might one day take over their spot. So one could argue that is a conflict of sorts, and so does your advice hold true? Like you communicate and not be afraid, and do what would you say if your boss feels threatened? Jennifer?
I had a situation like that, and
oh, nice. Okay.
It was very interesting because every single time that I would like to be, like I'm going to take charge, and I was a branch manager of a company.
Right.
And every time that I would want to take charge, something would not be okay with my boss for no valid reason. So a very good question to ask at that particular time, and which I did to my boss, was, without having any point of view that, oh, he's being mean to me, and that drama and emotion, it's actually asking hardcore questions. It's like, how would you manage this differently? Can you please teach me so I can learn from you? Put the ball in your boss's court. Don't be afraid to do that. Because I did that. I said, would you please help me to learn from you? And what would you do different so that I can be more effective in the area that you feel I need a little bit of more help?
Sure.
And it was generally asking the question. We don't ask questions, we assume, and then we react, and then we go into the drama and emotional. It's not that. It's about asking questions.
Yeah.
Be in question. Be the question, rather. That's how and it was strange how he turned around and he said, oh, let me get back to you. Because the other thing is this. You have to know there are two things. Either your boss may say, no, we won't address this right now, simply because he does not know how to address it.
Right.
Or he will just say no to you because he just doesn't want to deal with it.
Sure.
So you have to get to know, as in the KNOW and then NO, and to really know where the difference is when you're acting and speaking to somebody who is rejecting what it is saying. It's a very interesting thing to do. I used to do that all the time with my bosses, and then my staff learned how to do it with me. So it's really cool. And you've got to be vulnerable enough to actually receive that. It's really vulnerable, because that's how organizations grow, literally.
Sure. Anyone, Mansoor, Mario, do you have anything to add to that? I think we have time for one more question. But before that, anything you would like to add to Jennifer? Thoughts on that?
I would go back to an old story of mine, and it's what I did in that environment. I was working with one boss. She was particularly direct. She was very imposing, and I heard what a lot of people said when I joined. She can be like this, she can be like that. She breaks relationships. I did that job for 4 months. It was probably my shortest stint anywhere. And for 3 of those months, I worked really solidly with her, and I was very transparent with her. I did what she wanted. However, I challenged her and I kept it very positive. In the last month, I realized that she was really impeding. She was stepping in the way of a lot of my relationships, because that was just her style. And this is something that people will be put in a position of, where their boss doesn't act reasonable, or doesn't make them happy, or give them an environment which they can grow. That's exactly where I was.
Right.
The thing I did there was I made sure that I created a path for myself outside. I believed in myself. I knew what I was capable of. I applied for new roles, and I was also setting boundaries with her. So when it got to the point I went too far, I would put a boundary down and say, look, I appreciate where you're coming from, but this is a boundary I won't cross. I'm not going to put somebody down publicly. I'm not going to be dishonest with somebody, and I would be I'd be very direct about that. Now, it was a horrible 4 months of my life, but as we said in the past, I became much stronger as a result of it.
Sure.
So I was grateful for the experience. So
absolutely. Thank you.
Change it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe we have like 4 minutes left, and I think there's an interesting question that came through the audience, and was going to talk about this as well. We were talking about drawing the line and or rather having the distance between having a professional relationship with your boss, and drawing that line between friendship and being and the work relationship. When gender comes into this mixture, and when you have bosses who are of the opposite gender, if the two bosses are males and one of them invites the other for a drink, no problem. But if the roles are reversed, then especially in today's day and age, the optics are bad, and also it could lead to many other kind of repercussions or complications, or leave room for that relationship to go down the path. So what would you say, like how when gender comes into the equation, any take on how to tackle that, or how to be sensitive about it, or how to be aware about it?
I mean, if I'm asked that question, and if I was to answer you, how much do you know? How much do you know about yourself? Mm-hmm. Seriously, I mean, I know who I am. If my boss was a gentleman who asked me to come up for a meeting or a drink, if it is something that I believe it can be tackled in a meeting, I would go. But if something can be tackled in an office, I would do it in the office. So the question it's again about how are people perceiving, and what if we didn't have to go into this gender stuff? Everyone today is equal, in my opinion. Okay, there's no like you're a lady, so you shouldn't do this, and you're a man, you shouldn't. So that's of the past. It's not working anymore. So the question is, how certain are you of yourself, where you can actually be aware of what has been discussed in a meeting outside can actually be discussed in the office. That's number one. Number two, how comfortable are you in your own company, and how secure are you within yourself that there's no question of you having any, and what other people think about you totally should not be your business. Stop making it your business. Seriously, get into really honoring you and who you are, and everything actually falls into place there. That's my take on it, personally.
Fantastic.
I mean, while I agree with Jennifer on this, I also see a slightly different view when it comes to culturally accepting things in certain cultures. So I guess in certain cultures, people are okay. You're treated as one. It doesn't matter what your gender is, irrespective. And today we talk so much about gender equality in organizations. Today, organizations are giving leadership targets of how do you increase equality, how do you increase, have a mixed gender, right? So in certain cultures, people look at it slightly differently. Yes, you shouldn't ideally worry about how people perceive, but in some cultures, they are more out there than what it is in other cultures. Possibly in a South Asian context, it's looked very differently versus in a Western or a European culture. I don't know. That's my take on this, Jennifer. Yeah.
I would just finish off by saying spot on with Jennifer when she said that we've got to stop looking at the gender side of things so directly. Everybody is equal. Yeah. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not aware of culture, like Mario was saying. If a female colleague of mine said to me, or a senior or a junior said to me, let's go out for a drink, I would probably turn around, and if it wasn't the right, environment or the right people, or if there wasn't a crowd, I would probably say, let's grab a coffee. Keep it in a safe environment, in a more sensible environment. Whether you are reporting somebody or a boss, you need to also control your environment and be smart about that as well. One of the things that everybody knows about me is I'm an open book at work. Married, 3 kids, madly in love, have a great life. I talk about my family all the time. That stops people doing the wrong thing. Yeah, and why not be open about it? Because that is the authentic.
That's who you are. Yeah.
Exactly. But Yeah, that's the thing I would say. Just put it as public as possible in a sense.
Lovely. Right, with that said, I'm afraid we are out of time and we come to a close of today's session on managing your boss. I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Jennifer, Mari, and Mansoor. It was wonderful speaking to you guys. Thank you for being with us here today. It's been a pleasure. And a special thank you goes out to Vidusha, Anton, Tatum, Mahesha, the Luminary team, and to our audience who tuned in today. I'm your host, Varun Chandramohan. Thank you for joining us. Over to you, Anton.
Right, thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. Special thank you to Mario, Mansoor, and Jennifer for joining us and for that brilliant knowledge share that certainly kept us in rapt attention. Varun, thank you for superbly steering this conversation this afternoon. What I guess is not always obvious, but sometimes the relationship needs to be managed bottom up, not to be confused with apple polishing or political maneuvering as we heard this afternoon. It is, I guess, the process of purposefully and consciously working with your superiors to obtain successful results for you, for your boss, and the organization as a whole. On that note, a quick thank you to H1 for powering this series today and for being our technology partner for months ahead. Next week, join us again for the Revive and Grow segment, and we will be discussing managing your emotions at work. Do watch our social media space for more details. And coming up in the next hour, if you are tuning in, is that other with Varun. Click in and stay glued. We'll be discussing the good, the bad, and the ugly social topic, such as affairs and one not to be missed. Enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe. Stay productive.